What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Today I'm going to be talking about the Logias, and more specifically I'm going to be ranking them in the order I think they are in terms of power in the One Piece world. And usually, more recently when I've been starting these ranking videos that I've been getting into, I preface it by saying, oh, you know, this is just a matter of opinion, there's not a lot of information that we have on this topic, all that kind of good stuff, so I don't get completely destroyed in the comments and whatnot. But looking at this list I've created, I already know that no matter what I say at this point, I'm going to get shit on, so I'm more than ready for it, boys. Give me the best you got. I cannot wait to see what you think about my list. Keep in mind that I am dead serious when I'm making this list. I think a lot of people are going to disagree with me. I think a lot of these opinions I have are slightly unpopular, but I am being dead serious. I do have some information to back it up. So, you know, whatever, let's get into this shit. So at the bottom of the list, the one that I think is by far the worst, we have the Swamp Fruit, the one that Caribou has. I bet a lot of people don't even remember this, okay? They probably don't even remember this character. He's the guy who was at Sabodi after the time skip and kind of traveled to the New World with the Straw Hats. He was hiding out in a barrel, and he ended up kidnapping a few mermaids, right? I don't think that this fruit is really good in any way, shape, or form. It was good for, again, kidnapping the mermaids, I suppose. It's been shown that he's supposed to have an unlimited amount of storage space that he can absorb things into. But in terms of actual combat ability, I don't think that that's useful. Like, it did make these mermaids completely useless. They couldn't do anything while inside of this, of course. But what kind of person actually worth anything would get trapped in this? I think the real applications of it is it's kind of used for stealth, right? He was able to hide in the barrel, he was able to sneak onto the Straw Hat ship. And to be honest, I don't even think it's that high quality because they're pretty easygoing people, right? Like, they probably just weren't even on alert in the slightest because it's the Straw Hat. So I do think it has a little bit of utility, but overall, combat-wise, I think it's pretty shitty. It's not like the worst Devil Fruit ever, but I think it is by far the worst Logia. Next on the list, I have the Smoke Fruit, and again, I think this one is significantly better than the Mud Fruit, but it's definitely nothing too crazy. I think the strongest application that it has is that Smoker is able to fly with it. Again, I know a lot of people get pissed when I say this, but I put a lot of value on flying, especially in the way the Smoker is able to do it. He is very, very mobile with it. He pretty much, as far as I've seen in the series, can fly like Superman. He can very easily move in any direction. It's pretty good. It's possibly better than any of the Logias in that regard, so that is nice, and I think that is by far the greatest application that it has. But besides that, there's not so much, right? It isn't exactly smoke, since he can kind of grab things with it or whatever. It kind of can go between like being a gas and a colloid to some extent, but I don't think that's completely crazy or anything. I think that pretty much just puts him on a shitty version of like an awakened Paramecia Logia, or an awakened Paramecia Devil Fruit, kind of like Dofi's, but again, like if we're comparing this to Dofi's Awakening, it would be nothing, right? So I think it is pretty decent. Of course, there's a Logia. Most Logias are very powerful, but I don't think it's that strong compared to the ones following it. Next on the list, we have the Sand Fruit, and I think this is where they start getting a lot stronger. I'm kind of sad that the Sand one's even this low, honestly, because I think the Sand one is super powerful. And now, a lot of people think that Crocodile had an awakened Sand Fruit. While this is possible, I don't think this is the case. If he was actually to have an awakened Devil Fruit that early in the series, and he was actually to lose to Luffy, that would just seem kind of plot-breaking to me. I don't see how he could be powerful enough to have awakened Devil Fruit, yet at the same time, I mean, he loses to Luffy in Gear 1. I understand it wasn't just him straight up losing, he ended up beating him 2 times originally, but it's just not the point at all. But so, with the assumption that he was not using an awakened Sand Fruit, it's pretty powerful, right? He was able to do a lot of things that you might expect from an awakening. It sure shows that it has a lot of cool applications. If you get into close range with him, you might have some serious problems. But besides that, and those are important, but besides that, I don't think it's completely over the top or anything. Sand isn't necessarily the hardest material. It's not like fire where it's super hot, of course, anything like that. It doesn't really restrict people in any huge way. I think the strongest things that it has are the awakening kind of seeming things the Crocodile is able to do, and those are very good. And that's why I think it is lower than most of these, but it's most certainly above the the swamp and smoke. And next on the list, we have Monet's Snow Fruit, okay? I think this one is a little bit tricky because I kind of want to put it higher because I have Aokiji's Cold Fruit a lot higher, but I think it's a much weaker version of Aokiji's. Because first of all, just so we can make things clear, Aokiji's fruit is not the ice fruit, it is not the frozen water. Okay, that's ice. Yeah, it's not the ice fruit, right? It's called the cold fruit. And I'll get to that later why I think that's important. But this is the snow fruit. And similar to the ones before this, I think that that is not necessarily an extremely powerful material, right? I think that the big thing about this fruit is the cold aspect. I think that that's where she really gets you. Like how we saw when she was facing Luffy, she also has some kind of special abilities with it, just like Crocodile. If she is able to touch you, she pretty much can freeze you to the point that you're not able to move. Even someone as strong as Luffy was not able to move until he pulled off some weird ass shit, maybe Conqueror's Haki. Not really sure what the fuck was going on there. Not really the point though. But I would say that that's pretty much on par with Crocodiles in that regard. Of course, Crocodile can do a lot more. He can dry out inanimate objects, but that's not necessarily always that valuable in most combat scenarios. So I'd say it's pretty much even in terms of its like extra abilities. But she can control the environment and make it very, very cold for people, right? Which makes it a lot more difficult. I don't know if this affects her. I like to assume it does not because she is the person who ate the snow fruit, right? So she's considered a snow human, and she's not really exactly human anymore. Half. Not the point though. She's a snow human, right? So I would like to think that snow doesn't necessarily affect her like the cold. But pretty much my point is, I think it does everything that the sand fruit does. It's not that good actually attacking people with snow, but it has some extra weird abilities that can be pretty powerful in combat, as well as the fact that it does slow people down by cooling down the environment significantly. And next on the list, and here's where the hate begins, boys. I already know what's coming, especially with these next two. The one I have right here is the Magma Fruit. Big boy Akainu's fruit, okay? I think that this is a very powerful fruit. I think this is, again, another point where it starts really ramping up. I think he can do a lot of cool things with this. Of course, it's extremely hot. Just coming anywhere near this magma, you're going to get burned to an extent. Not really sure how that works in the One Piece world, right? Like, if you're using really powerful haki, would you not even be affected by this? I don't know. Probably not. I mean, the fact that Shanks' sword wasn't affected in the slightest when he blocked Akainu's attack, I would like to think that haki could negate this, not necessarily because it's a devil fruit, maybe just because it could negate heat in general. I don't know. But I think it is very powerful. I think it's very cool how you pretty much just have this super heated fireball that's blocked or backed up by massive amounts of mass, right? Like, yeah, massive amounts of mass, of course. Huge amounts of mass. It's just a giant fireball that weighs a ton because it's all like molten, right? So you pretty much just launch this thing, as we've seen he was able to do against the iceberg, and it's going to be super hot. It's super heavy. It's just a giant fucking meteor, pretty much. This guy can pretty much launch his own meteors, and it's probably a lot hotter than an actual meteor. So he's pretty much Fujitora on steroids. Not really, but I mean, I think that this does have a lot of applications. He is able to fly to a extent, at least as far as we've seen, but I don't think it's anything absolutely over the top. I think despite the fact that he's been kind of shown to be the strongest of the original admirals, he actually has the weakest fruit in my opinion. And the next one, and like I said, here it comes, boys, the fire fruit. And the reason I know a ton of people are just going to be jumping on my wiener right now, telling me why they hate me, why I'm an idiot, why I don't even read One Piece, why I have no idea what I'm talking about, is because in the War of the Best, Akainu makes the point that his devil fruit is superior to Ace's. It is just a higher level of the same thing. And so here's the thing though. My understanding of what that means, and I've talked about this in another video, it was a very recent video I talked about this. My understanding was that that means Akainu does not need to use haki to negate the intangibility of Ace's fruit. Because his devil fruit is on a higher level, he is able to just attack him without using haki, and it will not be going through Ace. And I believe that that was the only actual thing going on there. Now, in terms of an actual combat scenario, 1v1, I don't know who would win. It's hard to say. But just with them facing other random people, I really think that the Fire Fruit is just slightly better. I think it can do almost everything that Magma can do. I think they're pretty much the exact same fruit, except there's two differences here. The one thing I talked about with Magma, the advantage it has is its fireballs are backed up by ridiculous amounts of mass, which is pretty good. But the thing with the Fire Fruit, and again, I always go to this, but I think its mobility is huge. I think that an experienced Fire Fruit user would pretty much be able to fly around quite freely. They could maneuver extremely fast all around their opponent. I just think that there'd be a lot more agility involved, and they would be able to get close to their opponent, be able to really hit them a lot more. If they have any good martial arts abilities like a lot of high-level people in this world do, then I really think that they would more often take the cake. And so while I do think it is really close between these two, and they're so very, very similar, they're even, it's kind of been said that the Magma Fruit is the Fire Fruit on a higher level to an extent. I think just barely, and I could be wrong, I could see it going either way, the Fire Fruit is just a little bit above the Magma Fruit. And next on my list, the one you're probably not expecting to be this high, the Gas Fruit. I think that this fruit is completely slept on. I think it is probably a fruit where it's disproportional to its user, right? Like, it is a super powerful fruit that is used by a very weak user. I guess the other example of this would be Ace, but I think the Gas might be significantly stronger than Fire. I think that the Gas Fruit is absolutely insane. I think it could even be higher than a lot of these, but a lot of what I'm saying here is speculation. I don't know to what extent this really can go, but as far as we've seen, it does seem to do a lot of things that you would kind of think are far out there. Well, I mean, it's not like there's that many examples, but the biggest thing I can think of is when Caesar was able to just take the oxygen out of the air. And this, of course, is not something that anyone can even see, so that was pretty overpowered. But since we know that he can do something like that, oxygen just being, an elemental gas, I mean, could he just manipulate, conjure any gas he wants? Like, can you even imagine what this would mean? He could pretty much create anything, right? Like, he just has every element at his disposal. Every single piece of matter in this world is made of an element, right? If he can just make a gas form of any element and combine them, whatever. I don't know exactly how it works, but couldn't he just make everything around him like fucking explode? It just seems pretty easy, really. I'm no like chemist or anything, but come on. I really think there's so much he could do besides just taking the oxygen out of the air, and I think that's huge, right? I mean, seriously, let's think about this. If anyone besides Caesar was using this thing, anyone on the Straw Hat crew like Zoro or Sanji, every time they get into a fight, no one has oxygen anymore. Okay, it's just over. Only the user, only Zoro or Sanji, whoever's using that fruit, has oxygen. So it's already on a ridiculous time limit. Since this is the One Piece world, let's assume, with great generosity, during extremely heated battles, that these people are able to hold their breath for 10 minutes in the middle of a heated battle. I mean, this is so far beyond what humans are capable of, and it's, again, in the middle of a ridiculous battle where you need to be breathing a massive amount. 10 minutes will give them. I mean, like, all they have to do is run out the clock for 10 minutes. It just seems so overpowered to me. Like, that alone seems so overpowered to me. Not to mention just all the other things that you could do by manipulating gases. I think it's completely crazy. It could even be the highest on this list, honestly, if it really is abusable as what I'm saying. I just am not 100% sure on really all the things you could do with this, so that's why it's not super duper high up. And next on the list, I have the Cold Fruit, and this is the one I was saying I think is pretty much similar to how Akainu's is on a superior, a higher level than Ace's fruit. I think that is pretty much the same thing for the Snow Fruit. I mean, I guess that doesn't make exactly good sense because, like I mentioned earlier, it's called the Cold Fruit, not the Ice Fruit, and I would think that like snow and ice would have to be, compatible with each other, whatever, but it's the same concept, cold and snow. And I even mentioned snow's greatest attributes being that it is so cold. But so the coldness fruit seems pretty ridiculous to me. I don't think it's the strongest of the three original admirals, but I mean, he can pretty much create as much ice as he wants without even necessarily using water. And if there is water, it's a completely different ball game, right? Like, he can just freeze anything. I mean, it's crazy. Not to mention, everything I said that I think the snow fruit can do, besides just creating snow and manipulating snow, of course, like how when she gets into close range, she can freeze people. I'm pretty sure that Aokiji could do the same thing. I'm pretty sure he could at least do that, maybe if not even in a stronger degree. I mean, if Monet, with the snow fruit, is able to like completely freeze people to the point that they can't do anything just by touching them, wouldn't you think the user of the cold fruit would be able to do at least the same thing? That just seems like common sense to me. And we've seen that it is extremely quick. You know, you could argue that this is just because he's like a master of this devil fruit, but he was able to freeze Dofi instantly before Dofi was able to react in the slightest, and it took him a few seconds to break out of there. So I think it's definitely an overpowered fruit. It's pretty crazy. It definitely is one of the Logias that gives Logia the name of being the strongest of the different classes of devil fruit. I don't think too many people are going to argue with this here. I think it's pretty reasonably placed. I mean, yeah, it's just overpowered. And next we have the darkness fruit, and I always find this one to be the most difficult to place, the most difficult to gauge, because first of all, the biggest advantage that it has is that it can nullify someone's ability to use their devil fruit. And how you really can say this works in just a random battle is difficult, right? Because what if Blackbeard goes up against Zoro? The biggest advantage to the darkness fruit is now useless. It has no effect. Of course, if you are facing a devil fruit user, this is a complete game changer and puts you on a different level, but you do have to consider the fact that it is not useful against the majority of the population. Now, of course, the people that Blackbeard's actually going to be fighting, probably almost 50% of them actually have devil fruits. Maybe not, but that seems like a reasonable number to me. So it would be very useful at the higher levels, but it also does have some different applications as well, right? I think just as a base fruit, it's pretty good, even without its nullification of devil fruit abilities. I think it's pretty reasonable. I would say it's at least on par with either like the fire or magma fruit. Again, we don't know all the abilities it has. I think that it's going to be explained to have a ridiculous amount. I think it has a lot more than what we've seen, and we've already seen a decent amount. So I also am speculating a lot there. And what we have seen is not too bad, right? He's able to pretty much absorb everything the same way that the swamp fruit is able to, and instead of people just coming out of it being groggy, I would imagine that they'd pretty much be dead if they're not complete monsters of pure power, since, as he explained it, it's pretty much a black hole. Everything in it is crushed. So it's hard to deal with a fruit like this. It's hard to get into close range with Blackbeard. I'm sure he can set a lot of traps for you pretty much. He's a smart guy. I think he's very battle savvy. I think he's the perfect person for that fruit, really, and I think that anyone who had it for an extended period of time would be able to use it extremely well in battle. And sitting up here at number 2, I have the light fruit, and I bet a lot of people thought that I put this at number 1, and I bet a lot of people are going to hate me for not, but as I've explained in many other videos, we've already been shown that despite it being called the light fruit, and I think it's actually called like the glint fruit or the shine fruit, whatever, I mean, it's pretty much the light fruit, right? It doesn't have all the properties of light. A lot of people like to say that Kizaru is able to move at the speed of light. And while this is kind of true, I would like to make it abundantly clear, and I'm not even going to really explain this too much, because I already talked about this in my Strongest Admiral video, but he is not able to just move at the speed of light whenever he wants. He has to, at the very least, based on what we've seen this happen, he has to charge up or something before he's able to move at light speed. I think, sure, it's pretty reasonable to assume that he's able to move at light speed, but it's not just any time he wants with no preparation whatsoever. It's been shown that he tries charging up, then like shoots himself, and Rayleigh stops him, okay? So he cannot just move at light speed whenever he wants. That clearly is not the case. If that was the case, this man would be unstoppable. Now, despite that, I think that it does have some properties of light, and that makes it extremely powerful. For one thing, it is pretty useful that with even a charge up, he's able to pretty much teleport, right? That can be very useful in a lot of different situations. He can shoot lasers, which I would imagine are pretty much just like little balls of lightsaber, okay? So they pretty much can cut through almost anything. I would at least imagine. It's hard to say. He was shooting a lot of these things at Law's ship, and it didn't seem like anything too bad happened. So again, not exactly sure what that entails. But even better, I think possibly his most ridiculous ability, if it's not him being able to shoot massive amounts of laser beams, is his sword. I like to imagine, and we really don't know, but I like to imagine that that thing is pretty much a lightsaber. I think that with very few exceptions, it could cut through almost anything, the exception really being something coated in hockey or probably sea stone. I would like to see what could really stop a lightsaber or something like that, and I don't see why that wouldn't be pretty much what it is, since it is a sword made out of light, right? Like, that seems reasonable to me. Unfortunately, it did not get too good of a showing the only time we've seen it, but that is because he was up against Rayleigh, and I do believe that Rayleigh is pretty much a hockey master, and if my theory is correct, that would mean that he just kind of happened to be fucked, right? Like, of course, it's still going to be an extremely powerful sword. That's pretty much what it would be, a lightsaber that can't cut through another sword, I guess, but come on, it's still going to be really powerful. It'd be made of an extremely powerful material, and then he'd be able to imbue his own hockey into it as bonus. So I think that the fruit is completely whack. I think it's one of the strongest fruits in the entire series, stronger than the majority of Paramecia's for sure. So I think that at the very least, this thing had to be at number 2. I'm sure a lot of people are confused as to why it is not number 1, but I think that there are very good reasons for the lightning fruit to be number 1, okay? Pretty much it comes down to a few factors, possibly only even 2 really. One being that, again, I think that he could actually even move faster than Kizaru, because Kizaru does have to, at least to some extent, have a charge up when moving at high speeds, and lightning can move at a third of the speed of light. And as far as we've seen, this guy doesn't need any kind of charge up. Maybe he does to an extent, we always see it off screen. And maybe it only, again, is used for teleporting, but again, that's still extremely useful. And when you're moving at a third of the speed of light, you're moving at the speed of light, right? Like, it doesn't really make a difference at that point. And then the other big thing really is the biggest factor, and I don't even think Enel really was a master of his Devil Fruit. I think he could have gotten a lot better. Just the massive abilities he was able to use, just the ridiculous huge beam of pure power that he used on Luffy, which of course had no effect. But imagine if it was not Luffy. I mean, it was so overkill. I think that the fruit in general, I mean, he just surrounds himself in electricity. That's completely crazy. I think just the idea of electricity in general, I mean, it has so many properties that would be useful for battle. Its ability to stun people. Like, what if he coated himself in electricity, right? How would anyone be able to stop him? Sure, you could use weapons, I suppose, but the majority of those are made of metal, and even if not, like, you have to get into close range. I mean, how much electricity could this guy surround himself with? I think it's pretty insane. Of course, I don't think it's the most ridiculous thing ever. I think there's a lot of ways around it, but it's pretty insane. The damage that he can do with his just giant beam of lightning is crazy. It's one of the most powerful attacks in the entire series as far as I've seen. I don't know if that's necessarily the greatest thing ever for 1v1ing, but I think it could do a significant amount of damage to a lot of powerful people. So it's really tough between the lightning and light fruit, and I would probably go back and forth on it in time, but as of right now, I am feeling the lightning fruit is probably the strongest Logia in the entire series. I wouldn't say it's the strongest Devil Fruit in the series, but I'd say as of now, it's the strongest Logia. So, yep, that's my list on the 11 Logias in order of how strong I think they are. I would say please don't kill me in the comments, but I already know what's coming. Pretty much starting at the Magma Fruit, almost every single one after that, besides maybe Cold and Darkness, I know I'm going to get shit for, and I'm sure that there will most certainly be people that are going to give me shit for those two as well, because fuck it, right? Like, come on, I need a little bit of flavor of everything. So, let's go, bring it on, boys, I'm ready for it. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Remember to leave me a comment letting me know what you think. Let me see your list. How would you rank the Logias? I would love to see it. I love seeing what people have to say about this. Hopefully it's not too much different than mine or one of us is going to be confused, right, at the very least. Let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys have an excellent rest of your day, and I'll talk to you on Friday.